Welcome, my dear ones. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we'll be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Lyndsay very generously shares with us her journey of giving birth to her 4 children. Her third child, precious Frankie, passed away 2 days after being born. This heartbreaking loss gave way to a family journey of grief and finding ways to live with this excruciating pain. She has a dream that shows her that her family is not complete, and they ultimately end up welcoming their 4th child into the world. A tender story of grief transformed. Now they are behind an initiative to help families who lose a child support the siblings with books as a catalyst to bring words to their children's grief. I was deeply moved by Lyndsay's ability to speak with such love and care for people everywhere who go through the experience of loss. Bringing this topic to the podcast helps us all to understand this harrowing journey that ultimately we must all experience when we lose someone we love. A big thank you to Lyndsay and her family for allowing us into their world. Welcome everybody. I have a very special episode this week with a woman that I've worked with, lovely Lyndsay, who has 4 children, has birthed 4 children. And Lyndsay has worked with me from the very beginnings. And she's got a story of a pregnancy after loss story, which I think is a really important story to bring to listeners because it is probably our greatest fears, something happening to our children. And we've had a previous episode which was really well received from a beautiful couple, Bonnie and Steve, around this topic. And I was so very grateful when Lyndsay reached out to share her very powerful stories around her babies in helping us to understand what it is that we can learn that can support us to navigate the mystery of life. And we all know that there are no guarantees, but Lyndsay is doing some really wonderful work with parents in supporting them through these stages. And I really wanted to bring her story to you. So thank you, my darling Lyndsay, for coming.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Lyndsay's given birth to 4. So let's see if we can't get through every one of these births because they're all very unique under themselves. Tell us about how you were feeling with your first daughter and what sort of prep you did.
Yeah, so Elsa was born in 2014 and first baby, so it was all very exciting, very nerve-wracking, but I was really determined to do it, on my own and to have like a natural birth. I wanted to have as least intervention as possible. Ian and I did the calm birth course through you. We did a weekend. And it was so just really helpful for both of us to learn so many parts of the experience that we probably just weren't aware of, especially for Ian. And we took away lots of little tips and tricks, and I felt very prepared for her birth. She went over, I was overdue by 4 days, and then I went into labour naturally, and I had her in the birth centre. It was a beautiful 12-hour birth. I described it later. I actually loved the experience. It was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. I felt so empowered, and birthing her in that way it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. And she was born at 6 a.m. and we were actually discharged later that day. So overall, the whole experience went really well.
What did you bring to that birth that you think made the biggest difference, Lyndsay?
I felt really prepared and I felt really in control. I knew the techniques that I had to get through it. I was one of these people that wanted to know all the details before I went into labour so that I knew what to expect. Ian and I had talked about the things that would be helpful in terms of how he could support me and what wouldn't be helpful. Of course, nothing can entirely prepare you for what happens on that day, but we had worked through kind of a series of, different things that we would do. I came prepared with essential oils and lots of exercises, and I'd been doing yoga throughout my pregnancy. So I felt really fit and strong, and I felt like my body was ready to birth her by the end of it.
Beautiful. You created beautiful conditions to be able to work with that birth. That's wonderful. And then you had baby number 2, little Charlie. Tell us about his experience.
So Charlie was a very different experience. After the birth with Elder, I was diagnosed with a condition called fetal maternal antibodies. So essentially I have Rh negative blood, and I had the anti-D shots throughout my pregnancy with Elder. But unfortunately, I still developed the antibodies. And essentially what that condition means is that it's a high-risk pregnancy. It's quite rare now. It's only less than 1% of pregnancies. Wow. I think it's 0.4%.
Yeah.
It used to be quite common before the anti-D shot, actually. And so the whole pregnancy was just a total polar opposite to Elder's. I went through the fetal medicine unit. I had weekly scans. We were monitoring him the entire time for fetal anemia. Because essentially what the condition does is that my body sees his body as a foreign entity, and because he has my husband's blood type, and so it tries to shut him down by making him anemic. So there's a special scan that you can get, and I had that scan weekly to check the anemia levels into his body and into his brain specifically, and everything was going really well until I hit 31 weeks and my levels skyrocketed. And at that point, I was transferred to RPA Sydney, where my pregnancy was managed through the specialists up there who were really experienced with this condition.
Yeah.
And the treatment for that is it's called an intrauterine blood transfusion. So essentially, the baby gets a blood transfusion in the womb, which is incredible.
Wow, isn't it amazing what we can do?
It's amazing. And the whole experience is quite daunting for parents, really, because I couldn't have any medication or anything through it. So I had to just remain very still. It takes about 23 minutes. There's anywhere from 8 to 15 specialists in the room, lots of big screens.
Wow.
And they have to locate a tiny little part of the cord where a 30 centimetre needle goes into your tummy, and it drops donor blood into that baby's cord. And they're safe anywhere from, I think they can start them at 16 weeks. So the older the baby is, the fetus, the more successful they are. So we were really relieved that we got to 31 weeks and we didn't need this procedure. And I had one at 31.5 weeks. The amazing specialists put a heap of donor blood into him, and his anemia went right down. And we got another, I think, 4 or 5 weeks before he started to rise again, which was incredible. And then I was induced.
Well, that's a huge thing to go through. Can you just talk us through how you were able to harness your mind in that space? Because that's very fear-inducing circumstances. And fear is one of the things that, we've got to work with in our pregnancy. How did you manage that mentally?
Yeah, I would say that I used the calm birth techniques more throughout my pregnancy than I had for Elder's birth and pregnancy. I had to really manage my thoughts, my fear thoughts. I had to surrender control throughout all of that experience to the specialists, because there was very little that I could do to change the outcome. I had to hand it over to them. I used the breathing techniques a lot in those 20. So it was about 23 minutes, and his procedure lasted about 40 minutes. So I had a muscle relaxant, which helped me stay still, and I had to really practice the breathing techniques.
Yeah.
I'm not a religious person, but I just ended up praying for that time. And it was a bit of a chant in my head. I can do hard things. And I was calling on, all sorts of help from my guardian angels and my grandparents in spirit. And that's how I got through that.
Yeah. I think that's a powerful story that you've told us there, because there's a point sometimes in life where we start to realize that this is way beyond our little ability to control, and we have to hand it over to the power of the gods, or however you want to frame that for yourself. But
Yeah.
praying and bringing your mind into a place of focusing on what you want rather than what you don't want is a very powerful antidote to a situation that you really didn't have control over. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So tell
And
us
so,
about his birth.
yeah, so I was induced at 37 weeks with him.
Wow.
And I was determined to bring as much as I could to have control over that situation. And those people who've been induced know what that's like. It's 0 to 1,000 very quickly. But I still was able to make it the birth that I wanted. So we still had all of those aspects of Elder's birth that I love, like the essential oils and I had my crystal lamps and all of the music, meditative music. And even though I was induced, it was a much shorter birth and there was some intervention, but I still felt that it was the birth that I wanted for him. Having a baby that went straight to the NICU, I didn't see him after he was born. He was a vaginal birth and I literally pushed him out and turned around and he was gone. So that was really difficult.
Wow.
Just again, that sense of control for me was a real life lesson in that I had to, I couldn't control that situation and I had to accept that very early on, that that's what would happen. And together, Ian and I just knew that we would do what we could in that moment, but that I had to surrender.
Yeah. So when babies do get taken to neonatal intensive care and that separation happens straight after birth, that is one of the most difficult things to manage emotionally. Women can go through very complex births, and it's not the complex births that can pull them up, it's that separation afterwards. When you were finally able to get your mitts on Charlie and when you were able to take him home, can you recall how you were able to make up or reclaim what got lost in that experience? What sort of mother did you become as a result of it?
A little neurotic, probably. I did feel like there was missed time. So he spent nearly 3 weeks in the NICU. And because of the condition and babies who go under the bilirubin lights, you can't hold them for a long time. So I didn't hold Charlie for 3 or 4 days, and that was really difficult. And I think at the time I was really focused on getting my breast milk in and ensuring that I could feed him. And so I feel like you're just you're in a zone like of, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to get this done. And it wasn't until he came home, I think it was about 2 or 3 months, that I finally just kind of laid down and rested, knowing, like, it was at that point I think the penny dropped for me as to what I'd been through over those few months. I was quite protective of him. I didn't have a night away from Charlie until he was probably 2.5. I felt a strong sense of connection with him because of what we'd been through together. And because I felt like he was such a miracle after having the blood transfusions and everything his little body had been through. For me, I had to really, take that time afterwards to process the trauma of what that experience was like for me.
I think it's helpful for us to always appreciate that the disappointment of what should be and wasn't can stay with us for a long time. But I always like parents to really observe, watch your process, watch how you respond to these circumstances. And what Lyndsay's describing as, I was probably a bit neurotic, I didn't want to be separated from him, is a very normal response to a baby when you do have a bit of a rough start. And then sometimes it's not so normal. Sometimes women do struggle with that bonding and that connection, but don't ever underestimate the power of bonding and connection. It is an absolute survival imperative for both mother and the baby, and it is a very strong thing. So even if you do end up where your baby is separated from you, please don't think that you've stuffed your baby up for life, because babies are wired to heal. And mothers often have a very intuitive sense around that, and they often keep those babies very close for perhaps a lot longer than they would have under other circumstances. Is that what you felt like happened?
Yeah, definitely. And I was worried with him because I hadn't held him for so long, and because I was, doing that electric pump in the middle of the night, and I was discharged well before him. I was worried about what that connection would be like. But as soon as I held him, that we made up that time really quickly. And I think the endorphins just flow for the first time once you start holding him. And it's just, The miracle of the human body is so amazing because, you know, my milk started to come in, but the minute I held him, my milk just came, you know, it was like my body just this release of stress around not being able to, you know, have him close to my body. It all came back. So, yeah.
The big letdown, the big gushing
It was like
waterfall.
that. Just a little bit
Oh,
later.
there's a baby here. Let's go, giving Charlie some beautiful, rich milk. So, yeah, thank you for highlighting that. I think it can be just helpful for people to hear that. Now, tell us about beautiful little Frankie.
Yeah, so Frankie was our third baby, and with my condition, as pregnancies go along, the rhesus antibodies, they do tend to escalate, so they tend to get worse, and so they say every pregnancy is 10 weeks earlier it needs intervention. So we were nervous about Frankie's pregnancy, and there was a new treatment available, immunoglobulin treatment, so IVIG. So I was really lucky under Medicare that I went through the Canberra hospital and was able to have that treatment weekly, which kept her antibody levels right down, which was a miracle for us. And unlike Charlie, my pregnancy went to 37 weeks with her with no intervention required. She was perfectly on track in terms of her size and her growth, and her scans were all very normal. I had a scan on, I think, the Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, and everything looked fantastic. And my specialists were keen to induce me and to get her out, obviously, because the later in pregnancy they stay, the antibodies do get a bit more aggressive. And so I was induced with Frankie again, and I had been induced with Charlie, so I knew what to expect this time. Wasn't as much of a shock to the system. But I had quite a difficult labour with her. It was much harder, I felt, and I don't know if that's because I was quite tired. I'd had two little ones, and I went into the labour feeling a bit more exhausted than I had with the others. And also the treatment that I'd had was a weekly treatment that caused quite a few side effects. I had a lot of, you know, bad migraines and nausea and things through the weeks while I was having that treatment. Her labour went for, I was induced, and so my body didn't react as well as it could have. My body went straight into labour very quickly, but my cervix never opened, and so I had to be slowed right down. So this went on for about 6 hours. It was ramped up, and then it would slow down. It would ramped up, slowed down, and I just wasn't making a lot of progress. And eventually we broke my waters, and 6 hours later she was born. But it was I felt like it was a long 18 hours, and it was quite emotionally taxing because there was lots of different people obstetricians coming in, just checking to see why my body wasn't birthing or wasn't responding as it should have been. But she was born at 3:16 a.m. And she came out crying, and I held her, and she had these hazel eyes and quite long hair. I'd been warned throughout the pregnancy that she was very hairy, and she really was. And so I held her, and she cried, but her oxygen levels weren't great when she was born, and I noticed there was a little bit of kerfuffle in the birthing room, and my husband was next to me. We knew she'd be rushed to the NICU, so we saw them kind of rush her off, and I didn't think too much of it. I had to have stitches, and then like a shower. I wanted to have a shower. I had something to eat, and then the midwife came and said to me, "We'd like you to go see Francesca now." And so I was wheeled up into the NICU, which in Canberra Hospital is on the top floor. And as I came down the corridor, I could see Ian sitting down the end of the NICU, and he was visibly upset, and there were specialists and doctors talking to him. And I was wheeled into the NICU room, and Frankie had a lot of cords around her, and there was a lot of specialists working on her. And it became apparent that she was really unwell. So she had low oxygen levels, she had acidosis, she had swelling of her heart, and at some point she'd had a brain bleed of some sort. So she was quite sick, and they had put her into a coma. And this was all within the first few hours. And so Ian and I had some conversations with the staff at the Canberra Hospital in the NICU who were incredible, and we came up with a plan to try a few different things. There was blood transfusions. They tried an exchange transfusion, which is where they replace all the baby's blood in case it was the antibodies that were causing it. And none of that, she made no progress in those first few hours. So later that afternoon, we made a decision with the specialist that Frankie would be moved into palliative care, that she wasn't, I can't remember the words they used, but she was very unwell. It wasn't viable or compatible with life, her little body. And so she moved into palliative care, and my parents came down, and some of our special friends came and met her, and we baptised her. And at 36 hours old, I got my first cuddle again after the birth cuddle. And we held her, and I tell the story. My husband just kind of said to her, "It's okay, honey, you can go if you need to." And she literally, she died in my arms. She was only supposed to stay for 2 days, and it's been 4 years for us now. And I can talk about it much easier now than I have ever been able to. But it was, it was a very shocking and traumatic experience. I think neonatal death is particularly cruel, because you have this most beautiful experience of a baby's birth, and then another, very big experience for life, which is death, and you have all of it within a matter of hours. And so she was born alive, and there was no sign that anything was wrong in those moments when I held her. And then all of a sudden, her little body deteriorated, and she had to go back. Yeah.
A huge thing to go through. And it doesn't matter how long these babies are with us, whether it's in utero, birth, 2 days or 20 years, that, it's not it's not the way it's meant to be. Our children are not meant to go before us.
Yeah.
So it's a huge thing to experience. How did you manage that with the other children, Lyndsay?
So it was a very traumatic experience for the kids. Ian and I have only just been able to actually talk about what that was like, because I think grief itself and trauma like that is so distressing for an adult. And then to try and parent while you're going through that, and to try and explain it to kids. It was Frankie's 4th birthday yesterday, actually, and I shared a video that we had of the kids talking to her the night before she was born, and they were so excited. And anyone who's had siblings can understand what that's like, the excitement of babies in a family, and then having to bring them up to the hospital. And our daughter came running down the corridor, and she had these pigtails, and she said, "Take me to my sister." And so we took her in, and we had to tell her in that moment that Frankie wasn't going to make it. And so I think that started a very hard journey for the kids. They were 5 and 3, and it's a cruel age to learn about death. And for them, I felt like their little dreams were all shattered in that moment. It's been 4 years, and it's been a really long journey for them. But I'm really proud of how they have been able to move through that. And Frankie will always be part of our life, and we talk about her every single day in our house. She is definitely not forgotten. I feel like you would never choose this path, but for the kids and for us, there has been so much growth as well, at learnings, and the new little versions of who they are really beautiful, emotionally aware. They have so much compassion and empathy in their little bodies and in their little life experiences. And I hope that bodes them well through life, and it doesn't destroy them, if you know what I mean.
Well, love heals, and being in a loving family who are open and supportive of their waves of grief and how they process the loss of a sibling is the key to getting through anything in life, isn't it?
Yeah, we definitely found that grief is still one of those quite taboo things, and it was quite a challenging time. We went into the bushfires and then COVID, and so we don't have family in Canberra, and our kids didn't see their grandparents for 2 years and 8 months, so we were very isolated during that time. And so grief while being locked down, it was quite insightful for me as to how society handles grief, and how people find it really difficult still to talk about it. And that silence that happens, I think, after something traumatic happens.
Yeah. What would you say to a person listening in today's podcast around managing the grief and the loss of a child? Because I suspect there are people listening to this who have been through that experience and people who are fearing it. What would you
Yeah.
say?
Oh, my heart just breaks so much, and I have so much empathy for people who are in that first 12 months. People said to me in the beginning, this is it's a pain that it doesn't compare to any other pain, and that is absolutely true. The first 12 months are absolutely the worst, and if I could say something to anyone going through it now, I would say that you'll be okay, because I wish someone had told me in that first 12 months that I would be okay. I felt like I would never be happy again. I felt like the sun would never come up, and I've kind of described it as I felt like my soul left my body in those first few months. It was it stripped me back to a soul level, and it stripped our marriage back to a soul level. But I would say to people that every single day the pain gets a little bit easier, and it's time does definitely help, and that you are much stronger than you feel in that moment, and you have so much ability to get through those experiences even when you're doubting how you could ever go on. And I would say to people to give themselves the permission to do whatever you need to get through that. And if that means lying in bed for weeks, if it means watching trashy TV, if it means not responding to text messages or catching up with who you want to catch up with, or whatever you need to do in that moment, you have permission to do whatever you need to get through, and you don't need to make any excuses for that. I think that when you go through something like that, it's just about survival, and it's not putting any expectations on yourself to reach certain milestones at any point. It's just those first 12 months will be a blur to you, and it's just about getting through it.
And everybody has to walk their own path of grief, don't they? It's a very individual experience. How did you and your partner stay connected?
It was really hard. It hit me very early on what had happened. But Ian's really open about the fact that it took him a few months. So in the beginning, he went into kind of care mode, and he was looking after me, and it wasn't until I would say 3 months later, when he had to go back to work, that it hit him like a lead balloon, something. And so that's when our focus in our family switched to his healing, because he had the penny hadn't dropped for him, I don't think. And because I had lived that birth and that experience, and I physically had gone through so many changes, I felt like it hit me very quickly, what the reality of the situation. One of the best pieces of advice we were given very early on was maintain that touch. And when it was really, really difficult, and when there were nighttime is very hard when you're going through grief and you're both lying there in the silence. And for us, it was like I went over and over in my head the situation, like, why did it happen? What did I miss? Kind of, not blaming myself, but trying to understand if there was something I could have done. And that's a motherly thing to do.
Of course.
But the touch was really important, and often, just passing each other in the corridor, we would just try and touch each other and just maintain that that connection. I think that was really important through that time. We tried to talk a lot, and we both sought out counselling and support services, and I highly recommend doing that, even if you don't feel like you need it. For us, it was huge. Like, we were able to just talk to someone and to reshape how we were feeling, and to help someone else, for both of us to have someone there to help us see how each other was processing it, because we were so different.
Is that the Canberra Grief Centre? Did you go there, or how did you get that support?
Yeah, we went through Red Nose, so the Red Nose counsellors, who were incredible and have supported and also ran a lot of sessions for our kids as well. And I highly recommend them. I would also say sometimes it takes a while to find someone that you're totally comfortable with. And I know that Ian He saw a few different people during that time, because it's really important to have that connection. And for him, it was talking to a male in the end.
Yeah,
He was able to talk through what had happened much easier than he was with one of the female counsellors. So it's very individual.
yeah. That's not surprising. Yeah, and it's like choosing a partner to spend your life with. There's got to be some sort of chemistry.
That's right. It's very deep.
To create the safety for a person going through that to be able to release what they need to when they need to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wow. So then you go back for another one.
No, I'm sucker for punishment.
Tell us about little Lincoln and how that unfolded.
So we never planned on having any more babies. Obviously, 3 was definitely it for me. And then when Frankie died, we just didn't feel complete.
Mm.
And I felt like a huge hole was there. And I think when you go through something so traumatic like that, the allure of that joy back in your life of a new baby was too much for me. I couldn't turn away from it. So we reached out to specialists for their advice, one in Australia and one international, to see, about our condition, because we knew that a third baby with this condition would be a lot. And Lincoln's pregnancy was very high risk, but we decided to try again. And I've shared this story. Frankie, I had a dream, and in the dream, Frankie had a little boy, and she said, "Mum, he's ready if you're ready," or "He's ready when you're ready." And the little boy looked at Frankie and said, "Oh, she recognizes me." And I woke up and I knew straight away that it was another baby. And
oh my goodness, I've got goosebumps from head to toe.
It's hard to believe now, but it was Lincoln's face. Like, I can picture the little boy now, and I know it was Lincoln. So I told Ian, and together we agreed that we would give it a small time frame, and if it was meant to be, it would be. And the universe is always in control. And I fell pregnant with him, and we were managed through the fetal medicine unit and also through RPA. So I had a number of specialists looking at my test results weekly, which was really great. And at 25 weeks, I had to go back to RPA, and I had 4 of the intrauterine transfusions every 10 days until I got to 34 weeks.
Wow.
And they were very high risk. They were much harder than Charlie. And I think the specialist probably it was very stressful for him. My placenta was in the wrong position, and he was a very active baby. Now that I know his personality, we'd go into these 23-minute procedures, and they would take an hour and a half because he would just be kicking around and no one could get hold of his cord. And though it was during lockdowns as well, so it was really quite challenging from that space as well. We were locked out of Sydney, and then we were locked out of Canberra, and there was issues with blood because we were relying on blood transfusions. But at 34 weeks, he was induced. He was a planned Caesar. So I had the choice if I wanted to go down another induction or to have a Caesar, and that was really hard, Tracy. And that's when I reached out to you. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do.
Ian and I were very torn about what to do, because again, I wanted that control, and I was so passionate about having those vaginal births, but I had to acknowledge my limits. And after Frankie's birth, I didn't feel like I could do that again. I knew medically the best scenario for him was a Caesar, so that we could, because he'd been so unwell, they could assess his blood levels very quickly, and I didn't want any pressure on his little brain. Frankie's post-mortem came back very unclear as to what had caused her brain bleed, and we'll never know exactly what that was. And so I couldn't take that risk again with him, that something might happen again. So it was a planned Caesar, and I was at Canberra Hospital, and he was born at 3:30 in the afternoon, and he came out crying as well for 34 weeks. He was quite a big baby, actually. The Caesar was very different to my other experiences. I certainly in the beginning struggled with some aspects of it because it wasn't what I had planned, but I was so focused on getting him out healthy and getting him into the NICU that I knew that I, again, had to just lose control of that situation.
Lyndsay, tell me, in our session, what was it that helped you to set that up? Because you said it made a big difference to your sense of control in that situation? What were the things that we worked through that really supported how you experienced this high-risk birth by a
Yeah. I think essentially most of them were the techniques that I had used throughout all my pregnancies and my births. They were just tailored to that situation.
Yeah.
I used a lot of the visualizations, the chanting in my head that I've been through the worst possible thing. I can do this. Like, I'm really loved and supported, and having Ian there, who I knew was on the same page as me, and we were in this together, and we had survived the unsurvivable. I knew that we could get through, a small, tiny little experience of that Caesar. I knew that I could do that.
Yeah.
I was able to do little things that I felt made a big difference to me, in that I had come well prepared, but I had still done all the important things. Like, for me, I was so passionate about getting a colostrum and things like that. And so I was able to feel that control, that there were some aspects of me in that process.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
What did you do with your mind during the birth?
So again, I went into the visualizations, the lotus, I think it was. Yeah, your tip. I used that for all 4 of my births. And I also visualized the waves coming and going throughout it. And the season was very different in terms of the feeling, the physical sensations. And so I felt like that worked. And I prayed. I called on my archangels, and I just prayed for the outcome. And it was quite quick, actually, compared to the treatments that I'd been through and the transfusions. I felt like it went really smoothly, and it was over quite quickly. The challenge for me was I didn't get to see Lincoln until 5:30 the next morning.
Right.
And so I think that's a really painful part of pregnancy after loss, if they go straight to a NICU.
Yeah.
Because it's your mind goes to really horrible places. And I would say that night, I was on my own that night because Ian was in lockdown with our kids, and so he left. And I would say that's probably one of the hardest nights of my life. I just prayed. I didn't sleep the entire night until I could see him. I found it really hard to accept that he was okay and that I hadn't laid eyes on him yet.
Yeah.
And that's when I use those visualizations and, that mantra, I can do this, and he's in the best place, and I trust the universe, and all of those things that he had taught us came back that night to me as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. I say this often, all the time. These tools that we learn are the tools that not only get you through all stages of labour, but all types of birth. And by the way, they're really good for parenting. And you've just illustrated that so beautifully. When you're in a situation where you are not in control and you don't know whether your baby's well and you're not sure what's going to happen, and that's excruciatingly painful for us humans with complex brains, where we like to assume that we are actually in control, and that letting go, one of the things you can do is to anchor yourself to your capacity to just contribute to the situation by staying as calm as what you can, using your breath, and then using your mind and projecting your mind to that little baby, letting them know, how much you want them to be here, and praying is a beautiful thing, or just affirmations, however you want to frame it. But those sorts of tools are powerful ways that we can anchor ourselves into the mystery or into the storm before we really know what's going to unfold.
Yeah, that's actually another good one that I forgot to mention, is talking to him. I was just having constant conversations with him, saying it's time to come. Yeah, like, I know it's early, but Frankie would have warned you this might happen. Like, this story that I made up in my head talking to him. But I felt like that our connection was really strong in that moment.
Yes, because even though physically you're not together, energetically you are. That baby has come, it's grown through your body. And we can never underestimate the power of connection, even, when it's remote connection. It's still very much there. Lyndsay, tell us what it was like when you met him.
Oh, so he was so little, like he was 34 weeks. I mean, he was big for 34 weeks, but I felt like he was very little compared to my other big babies. He was under lights, and I got to have that first cuddle from him. And yeah, it was very emotional. I cried I actually cried I was only there for, I think, 36 hours or so, and I was discharged 40 hours, I think. It was during COVID, and there was some significant staffing shortages, I think, during the hospital, and I was discharged very early. And so I was very emotional, and I literally, my body just, the emotions just, they did not stop while I was holding him. But he was well, and he was doing really well, and that was just, the relief was, I can't even describe it.
Wow. And were you able to breastfeed him? Was you able to get some milk into him?
Yeah, we did. I was doing the pump through the night, and I was driving backwards and forwards to the hospital. So he spent 7 weeks in the NICU. For his lungs weren't quite ready, unfortunately. And so I would come backwards and forwards with milk for him, and I didn't actually get to put him on the breast until, I think it was at least a week. I think it was much longer than that. I can't remember the details, but when it happened, it was beautiful.
Wow, amazing. And he's 2.5 now, Lyndsay. What's he like?
He is such a character. He is definitely the test out of all of our kids. He is wild. And I think being the baby, he's hilarious. And so the kids find him quite entertaining. And so instead of being naughty, he's just funny. And he keeps me on my toes. Like, I've never run so much. He's into everything, and he climbs on everything. And he's a real little boy, adventurous.
Sounds like he's got a pretty strong life force right there.
I feel like what he went through, he had a strong sense of, I'm going to come into this world, and because he wasn't supposed to survive on many occasions. Those IUTs are very high risk, and the fact that we got through 4 of them, and they were really hard IUTs. I feel like, I think he has a strong soul contract to be here.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Lyndsay, your stories are so humbling and so very generous of you to share what you've been through to get your family here, all 4 of them. And is there anything that you would like to say to our community about what you would, what sort of wisdom would you like to impart to our community?
I would just say that, as I said earlier, I feel like we're all so much stronger than we give ourselves credit for. And I don't feel like any of these experiences are random. I feel like a lot of this, for me anyway, I felt like the experience of losing Frankie was something that was pre-written. And I feel like Frankie was a very medically monitored baby. And so if there was any way I could have saved her, or we could have saved her, I feel like it would have happened.
Yeah.
So this experience, the entire experience of my 4 babies, has really just shown me to trust my intuition, but also just to trust the bigger picture, because we can't control any of this. I feel like a lot of it is out of our hands, and I have learnt that through my 4 very, very different babies and their personalities. And so trusting that process, and having some kind of faith in the universe. I don't know what it is, whatever it is that you believe in will get you through those really hard times, and that you are so much stronger than you think in that moment. And it's only when you look back that you realize, wow, I can't believe I got through that.
Yeah. Oh boy, if ever a person has tested that little theory, it's you, given what you've had to go through to get your babies here safely. So thank you so much for sharing with my community and the audience who are listening here today this very, very precious stories. Lyndsay, you're doing some really good stuff for families with who've experienced loss. Can you just share a little bit about that before we clock off?
Yeah, I'd love to share it. Essentially, for Frankie's 4th birthday just this week, we reached out to the Newborn Intensive Care Foundation, which is an incredible charity that helps provide equipment to the Canberra Hospital NICU. And one of the things that we really wanted to help change, or to support the hospital to do better, was support for siblings. And so because we've been on this really quite difficult journey with our kids in terms of their grief, we've helped them set up a campaign, Stories from the Stars, and it's open for 4 weeks until Christmas. And essentially what it is running a book drive where families can donate a beautiful grief book in honour of a baby that they've lost. And those books will be donated in beautiful grief packs for families who lose a baby through miscarriage, stillborn or neonate, at the Canberra Hospital in the next year or so. And so we want to be able to give little siblings these books to take away, to have these really hard conversations. Because we found that in the first few days, we bought a heap of books for the kids because we didn't know how to talk to them, and we found it really hard starting those conversations. And so we want families to have that there and then in that moment to take, and then those conversations can happen with a parent or a trusted adult or an auntie or an older sibling to talk to them about death. Like, it's a really hard discussion.
That's a brilliant idea, because that's how children need to process. They need to process through those sorts of conversations, but having a book like that to act as a catalyst to open the door can be very helpful, because how do you start the conversation otherwise?
Yeah, it's really, really challenging, especially when you're going through grief on your own. Finding the energy to then have that conversation is probably some of the most challenging parenting moments of our life. And the patience to sit with them and answer these questions no one can answer.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for extending Frankie's gift of life to people who also go through those experiences by doing what you're doing. I think that's absolutely golden. And thank you everyone for tuning in this week. It's been lovely having you here, and these are important conversations that I never shy away from, and nor should we all, because if it doesn't happen to us, it'll happen to a person that we know. Grief is everywhere, and it doesn't matter how old our children are. They're our most precious things. So it's a big journey. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Our Transform Your Birth course, both in Canberra and online, is waiting for you to feel calmer and more confident to give birth and change the way you labour. Or why not watch our free masterclass on Keeping Relaxed and Excited About Birth, where we discuss the 3 most important things that can change a birth. You'll find us at our website on www.transformparenting.com.au.